Want versus need loop. Let's talk about that loop. We put far too many things into our need category than in the want category, right? But that's why Jesus can remind us that we have a God who knows exactly what it is that we need. Sometimes we fall into the trap of thinking ourselves, well, if only I had X, Y, and Z, then I would be able to do X, Y, and Z. And that comes from a belief that we think that we know what we need, what is best for us. But throughout our life, we can come to discover that often we don't necessarily always get what we need. We um, we don't actually get what we want, but we do get what we need from God. That's really the message that I want to deliver today, or that God wants to deliver through me, I feel like. So we get want and need confused all the time, and it's so crucial to check in with ourselves on a regular basis to not get sort of confused or not get lost in the chase of what we think that we need, right? So here's how need driven addiction, or what I call spiritual slavery, develops in a loop. And we can look at it from a psychological point of view and a theological point of view here. So you've got desire, demands, need, expectations, disappointment, and anger. So it goes in a loop like that. And the way that it happens in our mind is that we think, I want, I must, I will, and then we think, you should, God, and you didn't, God, and because you didn't, I will. And this is what causes a lot of resistance in our minds and in our bodies. So let's go through each and one of these so we can better get to know what is actually happening here. So, first, desire. You can identify a desire in you by I want. So it all starts with desire. And there's nothing wrong or evil about desire. Actually, God created us with a capacity to desire. Everything that we say and do is the product of, first and foremost, having a desire to do so. Yet, it is very hard for basically us to hold desire with an open hand. What tends to happen is that we take that desire and we don't just hold it in an open hand and letting God help us in the process. We start to grip a hold of it and we want to control the outcome of that desire. Does that make sense? Now, that leads to demands. And you know that a desire is moving on and becoming a demand when you think to yourself, I must. So it doesn't take long for our desire to morph into demands. The thing that was once a desire is now going to take a hold of us, and we're less willing then to live without it, without that desire coming into fruition. And we're more and more than convinced that we have to have it. So when you think to yourself, I must, then that is a demand. And what the demand does is that it increases this kind of resistance in you because you think that you know what's best for you, right? And what you need. And so we're then more and more convinced that we have to have this thing or this person or this journey. We have to have it, right? So after we go from then desire, I want, to demand, I must, then beyond that comes the need, I will. So then what happens is that the demand then morphs into a need. And we can identify that in our mind by thinking, if you think to yourself, I will, well, now you're dealing with a need. And here is where we get confused between a want and a need. Now, with greater solve and surety, we're now convinced that we cannot live without this thing, this person, this degree, this whatever it is. Insert whatever you think that you need, right? This thing that was then once an open handed kind of desire has then been christened a need. And we're now fully convinced that it would be impossible to live without it. And it is now in control of your heart. And then you start thinking about it all the time. You're fearful when you're without it or when you don't have it. And you then kind of create like a plot to keep it in your life. And you do absolutely everything in your power. And the thing is that we have we have power, but we have limited power in relation to God, who is the all-knowing, omnipotent, omnipresent God that is something that we have connection to, but we don't have that, ability to get exactly what we need and want all of the time. That's just how it works. So, anyways, we plot how to keep that thing in our lives. Hi, Mama. So great to see you. So many interesting topics, Martina. Topics that are so relatable for me at the moment. I'm so glad to hear that, Mama. And thank you for tuning in. And feel free to share with me where you're at as well in relationship to wants and needs. And if you feel like you've got anything on your mind right now that you feel as if though you're confused, right, in between want and need and whether you actually need it or if it's just like a want. That's basically what we're talking about here, right? So again, we've got desire, demands, need, and then now, once you begin plotting how to keep something or someone in your life, then it begins morphing into an expectation. So now you're thinking to yourself, you should. And so you start projecting your thoughts on what should happen onto reality. And now you have an expectation. And an expectation is actually resistance to accept what is. Because now you are living at the mercy somewhat of something having to happen a certain way. So this creates a lot of frustration. It can create a lot of sadness. It can create a lot of comparison. In fact, this is perfectionism because perfectionism is when you project into the future and set highly unrealistic expectations onto yourself based on what you see, what you hear, based on the information that goes into your mind through what it is that you consume, such as social media, such as looking at other people's lives, etc., etc. So now we have expectations. So the cycle of sort of slavery, spiritual slavery, doesn't end here. Need then forms expectation as to what God ought to do. So we then think, you, God, you should give me this. Or you might not even have a relationship with God necessarily. And then you think, well, the world should give me this, or this person should give me this, or this journey I'm on should make me into this, and this, and it should enable me to do this and this and this. And now you're you're a slave to expectations. It doesn't end there either, because now you get to experience disappointment often, because sometimes, not all of the time, but sometimes, and more often than not, it can lead to disappointment. And now we think, okay, God, you didn't do X, Y, and Z. And so now you feel entitled. So you see, if you're convinced that this thing or this person or whatever it is, that it's a need, now you will think that you're entitled to it. And you will be convinced that you have the right to demand it. And then you will begin to judge God's love for you by his willingness to deliver. And then you say you didn't, right? Or it might not even be God for you if you don't have that relationship. We all have the relationship, we just don't acknowledge it all the time. We might say, well, this person didn't give it to me, or this source that I think that I should get it from did not give it to me, basically, right? And we can't believe that God would say that he loves us, yet not meet this need. And the fact is, though, that God has been faithful to all that he has promised us. But this desire that morphed into a need is not something that he's promised to give us. So you see, here's the thing. We are experiencing oftentimes disappointment because of thinking that there's something that we need, when in fact, God is the only one that knows what we need. We have wants, but who are we to say that we need it? And when we get caught up in this chase of needing things, or needing a person, or needing a dream to come true, or needing something to turn our way and only our way and at our time, this is the recipe for disaster. It is a recipe for mental, emotional, and spiritual, even like physical, just abuse to ourselves. And it distances us from the peace that God has for us when we surrender to God. See? And so when we then have this disappointment, the last thing that typically then happens is that it turns into anger. So because we now judge this source that we think is where we should get something from, get our needs met from, and that could be God, because truly God is the ultimate source in which things come from or people come from, then what happens is that we quit trusting in him, or trusting in that source, trusting in that person, trusting in that journey as we should, and we then let go of our good habits of faith. So isn't it good to know then that what actually is the way to sort of go beyond this loop, what actually is the answer here, is to trust God, that he knows what we need better than we know necessarily ourselves. Yes, we can have wants, and yes, we can have desires, but it's when we keep this desire or this need in our hand and we hold tight to it, so tight that it can't breathe, this is when we're caught in spiritual slavery, because we then begin to think that we know what is best in our time. And if it does not happen in our time, we blame everything or everyone outside of us. And I think that we can all experience this at different points in our life. Surely enough, I have, and you will have too. You've probably experienced this too. We all, to some degree, experience this. But it's the ability to combine, for me at least, to combine psychology here with theology, to begin to understand that we have the power to go beyond these thoughts and not let them keep us hostage, to not fall into the temptation of falling into this need to know how everything is going to play out, but to have faith and to trust. And this is exactly why it's so necessary to grow our faith. Because without that faith, we get so susceptible to be caught in this loop. And it's endless. It is so endless that it will truly drain you of energy. It will truly drain your relationships. It will drain you of absolutely everything to the point where you won't actually, you know, make progression in any way, shape, or form. But it's only when we have the sense of peace and that we do not lean on our own understanding, but that we lean on the understanding of God and let Him deal with that. And we just show up day by day, step by step, step by step. And we're faithful and obedient to God, that we can ultimately get to experience what we were seeking. Because what we're actually seeking is not necessarily the thing that we think that we're seeking. We're actually seeking peace. We're actually seeking a sensation, a closeness with this power that is beyond us. That's what we're seeking when we're in this loop of desire, demands, need, expectations, disappointment, and anger. Because ultimately what we're seeing in this day and age is, unfortunately, a lot of angry people. And the reason why that is typically because desire has turned into a demand has turned into a need, and a need has turned into expectations, which unmet expectations lead to disappointment, and disappointment lead to anger, which again leads to more desire to fix it, to no longer be angry or upset or fill in the emotion that you're feeling. See, so this is the loop that we truly want to become hyper aware of and begin to identify in our thought pattern. Because here's the thing too. Yes, this is a loop, but as it says also in scripture, as you ask, you shall receive. Knock and the door shall be open. And this is the key to our thoughts. And also sowing seeds in your mind, sowing seeds, you won't be able to harvest a fruitful mind, a fruitful spirit, a fruitful life if we don't take charge over these thoughts, because they are weeds. Desires can, yes, absolutely be beautiful and amazing, and we do have desires for a reason to be able to contribute to this world. But it's when we get kind of tied to these desires and when we expect everything to turn out the way that we think that they should turn out, that it creates dysfunction, and that it creates depression and all these things. So the answer is not in more desire. The answer is not in putting unrealistic expectations on ourselves. And those expectations, they start with a desire. It doesn't start with that. It starts with peace. It starts with peace in God's way. And with that peace, guess what? You can actually begin to nurture those desires. You can actually begin to show up for those things that you are seeking without getting tied to them, because you have already received the promise of God. You've already received this peace that so many other people are running after and chasing in people, places, and things. And it's not to be found in that. I hope you can sense my conviction. Now, this is spiritual work. It's mental, psychological work to take charge over this thought pattern, this thought loop. And that's why I also created the garden, a community for us to grow in faith, because faith is the answer. It is not in holding tight to these desires. It is growing our faith by becoming aware of what kinds of seeds that we sow into our mind, because it's the mind that then allows us to go about reality and allows us to not get caught up in all of these needs and demands that really checks our spirit and brings us back to the truth of peace. And ultimately, that is actually the highest. That is the highest that we can get. It's peace. And peace is something that radiates. You can sense if someone is peaceful. Would you rather be peaceful, or would you rather have all of the demands, all of the needs met that were your needs, not necessarily God's, for you? That's a difficult question to sit with. But I would not exchange any of this that I've just shared with you. I would not have exchanged any of that for all of the things of this world. I would rather have a peaceful mind, a peaceful spirit, a peaceful relationship to this loop and not get caught in that than to pursue all of it, but be kind of imprisoned to all of these so-called needs, which actually weren't needs in the first place. They were just wants that turned into needs. And I would highly, highly, highly recommend that you contemplate on this, because it takes contemplation. I don't think that you should begin climbing all these ladders that are out there to figure that out. It just takes contemplation and beginning to actually already now look at what expectations do you have. And if you have expectations that you feel are not met, go back and look at what kind of need it is that you feel was the root of that expectation, of that disappointment, of that anger. So if you feel anger, disappointment, expectations in your life right now, I can promise you that the root is a need, an unmet need that wasn't a need to begin with. That was just a want. Yes. So that is what I serve you with and help you with. Identifying in the garden, in the community that I'm establishing now, because I believe that there's an intersection between psychology and theology. There's a huge, huge, huge crossover there that we can utilize for the benefit of our mental, spiritual, emotional health and well-being. So you can go to bloombeyond.com/waitlist to come on into this community to take responsibility for your health and peace of mind, peace of heart, so you can go about this reality in a peaceful manner. Sending you so much love, and I will see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.